사시도키 조심해도 장리라블지 니르겐파리 상예신드 메테부와기 두근함나시 이당 구루라 남나 간내야 다야. So if you could hook up that big screen to your computer, then yeah, everybody who's online could see what's happening in the room as well. Or would you need a? So we've got the camera on top, you see.
Okay.
Well, Sandru can, so why not you? So we have a screen here. Maybe if we get that working, you could see. I don't know how it works, but we could have more participation through seeing each other. Would be nice, but it's not essential. Anyway, thanks for all attending. Extra class, just one Saturday class, but it's nice because we don't have a lot of time. Had I been in England this summer, we could have a bit more insight, a bit more kind of study of these subjects, but lockdown and everything, that didn't work out. So we're still trying to get something together. Anyway, so we've got a little bit more time today, so maybe we can have a bit more discussion or a bit more meditation, actually. That'd be nice. I see Chris Kenyon is here, Jason, wishing to go into the waiting room.
Yeah, I've just accepted him. He's just appearing now.
Hi, Chris. Chris has had a very bad accident, so it's very glad he could make it. If he is connected, I don't know. His name is there. So hi, Chris. Anyway, probably you are.
Hello,
there.
thank you.
Oh,
thank
yes.
you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Geshe-la, for all your thoughts and your the puja.
Yeah.
Thoughts at the puja.
We're going to do medicine for the puja tonight, so your name will be mentioned again. Yeah. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
the big screen doesn't seem to be working, but never mind. So where have we got to then? Well, we did this first verse where we talked, or first argument, let's say, by Budapalita, where he brought in a verse from another chapter of Nagarjuna's work, Fundamental Wisdom Stanzas. He talked about characteristic and object characterized. So that's one, first introduction. Gets us into sort of emptiness consideration straight away. Then we moved on to verse number 1 of the actual text of this chapter. So going from the general, what is a characteristic and what is an object characterized and how do they fit together, to the actual characteristics of conditioned, the conditioned, which is arising, lasting, and ceasing, arising, lasting, and destruction. So the first verse bringing in those things, and then the first verse is asking then, okay, you have arising, lasting, and destruction on any conditioned phenomenon, that they kind of mark it out as a conditioned phenomena. Each conditioned phenomena must have those three. So then, okay, so what about arising itself then? The arising, the characteristic arising, which could be on, could be on pot, it could be on table, it could be in you yourself, a characteristic you yourself have. Is it the case then that there are the three, arising, lasting, and destruction, on that arising itself? If that arising itself is a conditioned phenomena, it too should then have the three phenomena: arising, lasting, and destruction, conditioning it, characterizing it, working on it. So that's the challenge of the first verse, of course, and then the possibility that you say, so then that arising that's characterizing, say, pot, you could say that's not a conditioned phenomenon. So it doesn't have arising, lasting, and destruction as characteristics of it, because it is an unconditioned phenomenon. So that's the alternative posed in the verse. We haven't sort of discussed it all yet. That's coming later. So those are the two possibilities in the first verse. And then we said one problem would be, somebody says, yes, arising has the three characteristics: arising, lasting, and destruction on it. And then lasting, the next one, that also has arising, lasting, and destruction established on it. And then the third one, destruction, that also has arising, lasting, and destruction established on it, working on it. So then don't they all start to seem the same? What would be the difference then between arising, lasting, and destruction? It's Budapalita's idea. So that's not an argument of Nagarjuna, that's one that Budapalita is coming up with. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Pot has the characteristic of holding water, so it's got its own characteristic. So it's something that does distinguishing it from other things that are not pots. It has arising, lasting, destruction on it, pot, but it also has its own unique characteristics which then distinguish it. And pillar, so pillar is able to support the roof, to support the beams, so pillar is it has the general characteristics, but it also has its own individual characteristics. So there's no problem there. We can figure out the difference between a pot and a pillar. But arising, lasting, and destruction, if all they have is just these three characteristics each, which the opponent is accepting, then don't they all start to sound the same? A bit too samey. Yes, but the opponent then says, yes, but the way you have to understand arising, lasting, and destruction in our school is that arising is the causer of arising. Right, so the arising on pot is what causes pot to arise, and then the lasting on pot is what causes pot to last, and the destruction on pot is what causes pot to become destroyed. So those are distinguishing features. Then the arising, the cause of arising itself, that does not cause pot to last or pot to be destroyed. So in fact, you can distinguish the three like that. So this is where we got to last week, and trying to just introduce our minds to these lower schools slightly sort of unfamiliar, maybe unusual views of how you should actually understand arising, lasting, and destruction. So lower school views, Abhidharma schools. So let's we said then at the beginning of this next session, then we'll go on to this document I prepared called something about opponent schools. So we just want to read a bit of that. You maybe read something in preparation. Thank you very much if you did. So whose views is Nagarjuna critiquing at the moment then? So if you can find the document that says opponent schools, which is sent to you on Thursday and again this morning. And we'll read some of it, not all of it. Got that, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody else in the waiting room, Jason. Katya.
Yeah.
How about that? And Fiona, was that? Yeah, Fiona's she's just hidden. Good. Welcome to Katya from Sweden, probably. Good morning. Anyway, I had to leave her. So, yeah, just looking at this document, which Katya should have, opponent schools on the conditioned. Opponent schools on the conditioned. That's the document we're looking at now. Sent you this morning, Katya, if not before on last Thursday. So, this is the sort of the mainstream Buddhist views around at Budapalita and Nagarjuna's time. You know, these were the established traditional Buddhist schools at Nagarjuna and Budapalita, who are kind of responding to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. You know, these are the schools that they're critiquing. You know, even in the Heart of Wisdom Sutra, who is the person who's asking about emptiness? Shariputra. So he's a person from one of these lower schools. You see, you know, he understands selflessness as a person, so he doesn't understand the selflessness of aggregates. So he hasn't got to the subtle level of selflessness yet. So that's why he's asking Chenrezig, you know, how do you meditate in emptiness? And Chenrezig is saying, you don't just meditate in the emptiness of the person, you've also got to meditate in the emptiness of the aggregate, and so forth, you know. So that's a, you know, key, you know, bit of dialogue from the Heart of Wisdom Sutra. So he's from one of these schools, one supposes, yeah. Who knows what schools were around. I don't think they're all covered by Great Expositionist and Sutrarian, but there were kind of other schools around that were probably quite popular too. Anyway, so mainly I think we can discover the views of the opponents of Nagarjuna and Budapalita here when we look at the texts of the Great Expositionists and the Sutrarians, the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas. Okay, so second paragraph then. The major Sarvastivadin compendium of thought was the Mahavibhasa, the great commentary or exposition, compiled by Vasamitra and the 500 Arahats, 400 years after the Parinirvana of the Buddha. So this is the, you know, the Abhidharma kind of, you know, basic textbook. There are quite several Abhidharma, you know, sort of in a fundamental text, but this is certainly kind of maybe the biggest or one of the most fundamental. And so it's compiled as if, you know, the people who take it seriously, like, you know, every word in there is as from the Buddha. It's not the working out of later scholars, but they take it, you know, this is a record of how Buddha was actually, you know, explaining things. So the Vaibhasikas, the great expositionists, thoroughly based themselves on this work to the extent of considering it to be the work of the Buddha. The Sautrantikas, or the Sutrarians, Sutra followers, also had Sarvastivadin roots, so they're coming from the same you know, background, Sarvastivadin, but you know, sort of later evolution or later sort of transformation. So they reject some of the great expositionist sort of fundamental ideas that you've got to follow Mahavibhasa and you don't deviate from it, and they sort of relied more on, you know, more kind of evolved reasoning. More sort of, you know, let the Buddha's thought evolve a little bit and let sort of better ideas, you know, kind of adjust to kind of, you know, solve some of the contradictions. And then they say that they prefer to rely directly on sutras rather than following this Abhidharma compilation like the Mahavibhasa or so sort of slavishly, something like that. But of course, you know, on many things, they're not that different from the great expositionists, but they do have their differences, which are acknowledged in Nagarjuna's text. Of course, the main fault of all these schools is clinging to inherent existence. So that's the main, you know, object of attack. That's the main thing that Nagarjuna wants to help them with, you know, to get over that hang-up. But some of their other views obviously come into the text. And this is why we are looking at this summary now. Below are detailed some of their other views that Nagarjuna and Budapalita also refute in this chapter, plus any useful points that come from the treasury, Abhidharma Kosha, and Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya, like the self-commentary on the treasury by Vasubandhu. And then some notes from the translators will come in. Vasubandhu's treasury and auto-commentary, chapter 2. Samskirta conditioned is explained etymologically as that which has been created by causes and conditions, by causes in union and combination. So remember, when we say conditioned or compounded phenomena or composed phenomena, it means composed or compounded out of causes and conditions. That's the primary meaning. what are the characteristics of the conditioned dharmas? Their characteristics. So this is an actual quote from the verse of the Abhidharma Kosha, verse 45 of chapter 2. Their characteristics are arising, old age, duration, and impermanence. So we've had three characteristics here: arising, lasting, which would be duration in this translation, and in our text this is destruction, but in their text, this Abhidharma Kosha is something like impermanence, but that's, I think that means gross impermanence here of passing away. You know, once it's been here and lasted a bit, then it passes away. But they've also got old age in, you see. So they're not just sort of keeping old age for people, but they're kind of, you know, using old age as a characteristic of seems of conditioned phenomena in general. So these four dharmas, arising, old age, duration, and impermanence, are the characteristics of conditioned things. A dharma in which these characteristics are found is conditioned. A dharma in which they are not found is unconditioned. So Joris, can you give me a phenomena which is not conditioned? It exists, but it's not conditioned.
Uncompounded space.
Uncompounded space, yeah. So there are phenomena which are, you know, phenomena, they exist, but they're not conditioned. Uncompounded space is one of them. Yeah, so they also exist. Now, this is the Great Exposition sort of next, is the Great Exposition specialist kind of, you know, view of arising, lasting, and destruction and so on. You know, how they think they work, you know, they do, you know, they're active in causing things to happen to the conditioned phenomena they are connected with. Great expositionists, arising produces or causes to produce conditioned things. Duration stabilizes them or causes them to last. Old age makes them deteriorate, and impermanence destroys them. So they see this very active role in these characteristics, whether it is three characteristics, as Nagarjuna is using, or four characteristics, as it's actually found in the treasury. Okay, so now we'll just skip over the next section, number 2, for the time being. So we'll leave that for later, because that comes up when we get a bit further down the text. Now we'll look at number 3, point number 3, and you see the purple letter number 3. So it's again talking about the sort of causative effect, causative function of these characteristics. Great expositionists hold that the three characteristics are individual substances, separate things in and of themselves with a causative role. Yeah, so according to the great expositionists, everything has to be a different substance from everything else. Even an unconditioned phenomenon is also a substance, even uncaused space is a substance. And, you know, so that this idea of things being the same nature, the same entity, the same substance is kind of not really sort of in their philosophy. So that's one sort of improvement maybe that the Sutrarians make upon the great expositionist sort of outlook. But anyway, we're thinking about their causative function at the moment. So this is a quotation next. I think it's actually from de Vallée-Poussin, translated into English. It's like quotation from the translator. In a footnote, characteristics are things in and of themselves, distinct from the dharmas characterized, which cause arising, duration, decline, and perishing of the same dharma. So another way of looking at it, the power of arising causes the dharma to pass from the future into the present. Old age and impermanence cause it to pass from the present into the past. And after old age has weakened it, impermanence finishes it off. So I've got impermanence mentioned twice there. I wonder if I've made a mistake. Maybe, well, impermanence is there all the time. It's not just, there's a gross impermanence finishing it off right at the end. But maybe that's what the translator is saying. Old age and impermanence cause the conditioned phenomena to pass from the present into the past. Yeah, so they're bringing it to its end, and then after old age has weakened it, impermanence finishes it off. Yeah, so that's just giving some background to the view of the opponent here. And then let's carry on. The Sutrarians hold that they are activities, you see. The Sutrarians have banished that. That's one of the things they've rejected. They don't like this idea of those characteristics of conditioned phenomena being, causative like that. So they're talking much more about these things like we sort of naturally think about them if we've ever got around to thinking about them. It's not like the lasting of the lasting characteristic, or the abiding characteristic of pot. It abides at a certain time. It's not like some extra factor causing it to abide. So there's it just arises from its causal conditions, the water and the clay and the pot are making it, which these other schools, the great expositionists still accept the ordinary causes. They still accept all those ordinary causes of clay and water and pot, and water and potter's wheel. They still say those causes are necessary, but then the extra cause, that of arising is causing the pot to arise. So the Sutrarians don't see it like that. They say, well, pot arises, so there is the characteristic of a pot arising, but that's not causing the pot to arise. It's just like a feature of pot. It's just like something the pot does. So the Sutrarians hold that they are activities, one nature or one substance with a principal dharma that they are characteristics of. They do not have the causative power the great expositionists attribute to them. So this is the great expositionists, this is the Sutrarians now, in this next quote, in the auto commentary, following Treasury, chapter 2, 46. According to us, what one should understand by production arising is the fact that the series begins, the series of moments of the pot, right? The series of moments of the conditioned phenomena. Disappearance or impermanence is the end of the cessation or cessation of the series. Duration is the series continuing from its beginning until its end, and evolution or old age is the modification of the continuous series, the difference between its successive states. Yeah, so they're not supporting this cause of arising, cause of a lasting sort of a view. But is their view, satisfactory to Nagarjuna? Well, no. However, the Sutrarian presentation of object characterized and characteristic being different but the same nature or the same substance, which is their advance upon the great expositionists, still, Nagarjuna says, it's incompatible with their acceptance of inherent existence. So, they haven't explained things quite properly, maybe better on the conventional level than what the great expositionists have come up with, but it's still, Nagarjuna is going to knock it down. And the next paragraph, number 4, I'm just going to just read the first paragraph, the next section. So this is going on to something else now, which doesn't come up until verse 2 or 3. But I'll just read the first verse first, because we were talking about this last Thursday, this idea of how these factors relate together, arising, lasting, and cessation. How do they fit together? And we were saying, well, if you just say they're all simultaneous, you've got a problem. So how are you going to fit them together, even without wondering whether they are inherently existent or not? Just on the conventional level. And Budapalita does sort of insist at one point upon simultaneous. He says that generally, it's in the Buddha's word, that these 3 factors are supposed to occur simultaneously. So I'm just going to read that comment then. It's not, we haven't got there yet, but since we've been discussing it, I'm just going to touch on it lightly here. So this is Budapalita here. Because it is said that they arise simultaneously, those who know the state of the Dharma say that arising, lasting, and destruction arise simultaneously. So for that reason, they also not tenable as characteristics singly. So, how do you fit them together? And we said, well, if you take pot, it's a bit difficult to say that the arising of pot is simultaneous with the lasting of pot and the ceasing of pot. it seemed to us that the arising of pot has to happen before pot exists, right? I don't know if you come to that conclusion, but it seems to be the best solution. Lasting and ceasing, that's another matter. Do lasting and ceasing, can they exist simultaneously? On pot, on one phenomenon. Does pot last and cease simultaneously? So if Budapalita is saying lasting, ceasing, arising, lasting, and ceasing are simultaneous, but I'm suggesting, well, the arising of pot happens before pot exists, but the lasting and ceasing of pot can only start once pot has come into existence. So how are you going to fit my view together with Budapalita's? So that's one question. And the other one, which we had a bit of fun with on Thursday, but it's a serious question, and definitely it comes up in Nagarjuna as a critique of the lower school views. At the time of the arising of pot, there is no pot, because that's the time of the cause of the pot. So the pot's coming into existence, so it hasn't arrived yet. It hasn't come into being. So that's when we say pot's arising. But if there's no pot at that time, so what have you got? You've got an action. And so what's the action? It's arising. So what's doing the action? Well, the pot's doing the arising. But at that time, pot doesn't exist. So what have you got? Have you got a non-existent performing a function? And as we know, in the Buddhist sort of very basic layout of phenomena, performing a function is the definition of functioning thing, which is equivalent to conditioned phenomena. So you've got something performing function that doesn't exist, or what? Yes, Chris?
Sorry.
So there's a common base that exists, if non-existent and performing and able to perform function.
It's not possible.
It's not possible, but it is possible, because pot is that. Pot at the time of its own arising is that it is both. It is arising, it's performing function, and it's non-existent.
If pot is there at the time of its arising, then cause and effect are simultaneous.
So that's right. If you say, well, pot is there at the time of its arising, then you're saying, well, pot's there at the time of its cause. So you have cause and effect simultaneous, which absolutely not allowed by the consequentialist school. It is allowed by the great expositionists. So again, that's one of these uncommon views of the great expositionist school, cause and effect simultaneous, which we'll come to. So there's a bit further down the text yet, so no hurry with that one. But definitely the Sutrarians and the middle wayers, everybody else except the great expositionists, they reject simultaneous cause and effect. But if pot's not there, how is it performing the function? Right. And so on. So we've still got to fit these things together a bit more. These three characteristics. So we want to try and do that. But maybe wait until we get to the next verse. So I'll just finish off this commentary to the first verse, which is where we got to last Thursday evening. So we're on page 3 of the main text, chapter 7, and we're at the top of page 3. So the opponent has come up with his statement saying, well, how do you distinguish between arising and so on? So he says, well, there's a cause of arising, the cause of lasting, the cause of destruction only of pot, so no fault. So we'll start from there. So Budapalita's response. So this isn't particularly to do with emptiness or anything. This is just, they just don't like this view of those characteristics being causative. So Budapalita says, well then, those three characteristics are not pot's characteristics because they are its agents. They're what bring pot about. So they're not pot's characteristics. They're what make pot. So you should make a distinction between those two. Example, for the father, who is a cause of his son's arising, is not a characteristic of his son. So that's fair enough to us, isn't it? What's his son like? Oh, well, he's a human being, and he's a male human being, and he's tall, he's got blonde hair, or he's got good intelligence, or he's very good with his hands, or something like that. Give all these characteristics of his son, but then you wouldn't say his father. His father is a cause of son's arising. It's not a characteristic of his son. And then the place that supports it is not a characteristic of pot. So if you're asking, when a pot is in existence, give the cause of pot, they say, well, the support, the ground or the table that the pot is on is supporting the pot, you see. So then there's a cause and effect relationship there, The ground is a supporter and the pot is supported. So in that sense, that the supporter or the ground of my hand is the cause of the pot, staying. So that's what I think he means here. The place which supports the pot is not a characteristic of pot. It's an agent. It's a cause. It's like a helper of pot. Nor the hammer either. So the hammer is what destroys the pot. So the hammer is destroys the pot. So the hammer is not a characteristic of the pot. It's the destroyer of the pot. So don't call the hammer a characteristic of the pot. So that which destroys the pot cannot be a characteristic of the pot. Yes, the pot becomes destroyed. The pot is being destroyed by the hammer or something. Yeah, the pot is ceasing. The pot is becoming older and older, and it's going to, crack or something. So the pot is ceasing, and but that which makes it cease, ding, is its cause. The cause of this, it's going out of existence. It's not characteristic of pot itself. Therefore, arising and so forth, as conditioned things, are not tenable as the characteristics of the conditioned. So the way you describe arising, lasting, and destruction in your sort of specialist way, well, they don't qualify then as characteristics of the conditioned. So he's rejecting that if you have arising, lasting, and ceasing upon something, then they're not going to be the characteristics of that object if they have this causative power. So he doesn't. Then that's kind of a stop in the text there. So the ramifications and the other difficulties with once you set up the basic phenomenon pot, and you say this has these characteristics of arising, lasting, ceasing on it. There's a lot more to be drawn out of that in the way of advancing towards emptiness. But here at the moment, he's just rejecting that argument about the three characteristics being causative, and now he's taking the other possibility mentioned in the verse. Well, suppose we say that the arising that's established on the basic phenomena such as pot, let's say that arising is not conditioned. We'll say that the three characteristics of the conditioned phenomena themselves are not conditioned. So we'll say the arising and the lasting and the ceasing on pot, they themselves are not conditioned phenomena. So that was the second possibility in this verse. And this is kind of also pretty sort of unacceptable. I don't think there's anybody particularly arguing for this view, but to eliminate all the possibilities, which is Nagarjuna's method, then you have to eliminate this one as well. What if arising were not conditioned? So then how will it characterize conditioned things? How will it characterize what is conditioned if it itself isn't a conditioned thing? So we'll just read this last section of Budapalita's commentary on the first verse. Being unconditioned, how will it, arising, be a characteristic of the conditioned? Something is characterized by it, hence it is a characteristic. Maybe something missing in the text there, we don't know. So that which is arising, that which is devoid of arising, lasting, and destruction, does not even characterize itself. So how can what does not characterize itself characterize anything else? If it can, it follows that nirvana can be a characteristic of the conditioned, even though it is unconditioned. So there's a bit, maybe the text is a bit difficult at that point. But the way I understand that is in note number 9. So if you'd like to look at note number 9 at the bottom of the page. So if you say, well, arising itself is unconditioned, arising itself does not have, 3 characteristics on it because it is unconditioned or something, But if arising is unconditioned, then arising would have to be devoid of arising, lasting, and destruction. So how could you have an arising which is devoid of arising, lasting, and destruction? So how could being devoid of arising be true of arising? So it sounds completely impossible. So if arising which is devoid of arising can characterize the conditioned as arising, even if it, arising itself, does not arise, then even the vulnerable space can characterize the condition. So, the arising on something like pot being unconditioned is just, a bit impossible. So he says, hence that is not acceptable. I'm going back to the main text now, the main paragraph. Hence that is not acceptable. Therefore, so again, we might have something missing in the text. Therefore, it is not tenable that arising, lasting, and destruction are characteristics of the conditioned. So the investigation is by no means over. We're just starting. But Nagarjuna or Budapalita are really already very dissatisfied with those lower school presentations. So now the next one we've done, are the characteristics themselves conditioned or unconditioned? But as I say, we haven't really completed that first one about are the characteristics on pot, are they themselves, conditioned phenomena or not? We've just taken it so far and then stopped. And then, so conditioned or unconditioned. Now the next inquiry is, well, when we inquire into the characteristics arising, lasting, and destruction, should they be characteristics of the conditioned either singly or in combination? So that means one at a time or simultaneously. I'm trying to keep my translation close to Nagarjuna's actual wording, but I think you understand singly means one at a time, one by one after the other, or they're all happening together. So that if you want to investigate that a bit, you do get some you do get some things to think about, and like what actually goes on with the phenomena, coming into existence and lasting and going out of existence. Is what's coming from the object side, what has to be just put there from the mind side. Of course, when we are going into the Prasanghika view, the consequentialist view, Nagarjuna's view, then it's all from the mind side. There is no inherent existence, and that's what they're going to prove. And this next investigation, one at a time or simultaneously, is it gives you a lot to think about, or to start thinking about anyway. Yeah. So any questions so far? Yes, correct.
We said that Budapalita had an argument. He says that arising, lasting, and ceasing, they have as characteristics arising, lasting, and ceasing. So it means that they have characteristics, but those characteristics don't characterize them. Like for instance, here we have in the note 9.
Note 9.
Yeah. Like, that which is devoid of arising, lasting, and destruction cannot characterize arising. Like, for instance, selflessness is a characteristic of pot, but doesn't characterize pot. So we make a distinction in this case between being a characteristic of and characterize that. No?
I don't think so, yeah. But, you know, he's saying, it's kind of saying that if it's unconditioned, it can't characterize a conditioned thing. Yeah, that slightly makes you wonder, like, what about emptiness? What about selflessness or something? You know, that you can posit some unconditioned phenomena which do characterize conditioned phenomena. I don't know if you heard Chris's Jimba's question there, but he's asking about note number 9 on that page. So once something is unconditioned, how can it characterize a condition? So that's you know, what Budapalita appears to be saying. But then, you know, Chris is coming up with characteristics such as selflessness, which is a permanent, and you know, it can characterize an impermanent phenomena, an unconditioned phenomena. So we can posit several, you know, characteristics of pot which are, you know, permanent. So pot being different from pillar, so that's a permanent characteristic which characterizes pot, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not quite sure what Budapalita's claim is there, but I think what you have to understand at least is that if arising itself is unconditioned, then that's very sort of unsatisfactory. Okay, selflessness could be unconditioned and yet characterize pot, at least for the people who accept selflessness as phenomena. But to say that, you know, arising itself is unconditioned but it still characterized pot, that's a bit weird, you know. All right, if arising is unconditioned, arising has to be devoid of arising, lasting, and destruction. So arising would have to be devoid of arising. So that becomes a bit unacceptable. At least that, you know. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
One more questions. Oh yes, handle it.
I was wondering, can the lasting of pot and the ceasing of pot be the same nature?
Lasting and ceasing, yes.
Lasting and ceasing of pot,
Yes.
same nature.
Yes, that's something to discuss. Same nature. Yes, same nature. So that's you know, that's we're starting to think about what these characteristics exactly mean. You know, what do you think? Well, the lasting of pot lasts, yeah. So it endures through time. But the ceasing of pot is like pot's going out of existence. So shouldn't they be, you know, somehow incompatible or, you know, contradictory, or, you know, first there's a lasting of pot, then there's a ceasing of pot later on, you know. But if you talk about ceasing, or, you know, like becoming destroyed, yeah. If you say destruction when or cessation, well, there's a point at which pot has ceased, you know, there's a final end of pot, the final end of pot, let's say. But when they talk about ceasing and becoming destroyed, that's, you know, that goes along at the same time as the lasting. So those two, no problem, they're compatible.
Yeah. So is the gross impermanence of pot is like the, what is that?
Well, that's like the final cessation of pot. Like when we die, that's our gross impermanence.
Yeah. So
when pot ceases to be a pot. So
yeah. How many points between subtle impermanence of pot and gross impermanence of pot?
Another tricky question.
Just wondering.
I'd have to think about that. You know, I've thought about it before when we were studying these things, but yeah, we'll bear that question in mind. That's a good one. I'm not going to answer it now, but we are going to think about subtle impermanence. That's one thing I do want to talk about today. So it's very fine that we're, you know, we can bear that question in mind, definitely. I'm going to make a note of that. Try and make a distinction. But how many points? It's to make the distinction, how many points? Yeah. So that will keep that one in mind then. Anybody else got a question? Okay. Somebody has asked me to talk about subtle impermanence. Today seems like a good time, you know. The verse number 2 is going into how do the, you know, arising, lasting and ceasing, these three characteristics, how do they fit together, you know, one after the other, singly, one at a time, or are they all supposed to be seen as simultaneous? You know, we started talking about that last time, and now I'm saying that at least the first two are simultaneous. So at least the second two, lasting and ceasing, can be simultaneous, like they're one nature when you get down to it. But the arising definitely has to come before. And yet Budapalita is saying arising, lasting, ceasing are simultaneous. So where are we at? You know, so we've got to get into this. And, you know, this will definitely, you know, a good understanding of the conventional is what leads to understanding of the ultimate. So we want to hear about emptiness. But, you know, your reasoning that gets you to emptiness is a proper understanding of conventional truth and, you know, where that leads you to. So it leads you to have to posit an ultimate level 2, and you actually kind of experience things at this very deep level. Well, where's the arising, lasting? They all disappear with a pot. You know, they all turn out to be, you know, when emptiness arises, those things subside. Like, you know, they don't exist on the ultimate level. So this is, you know, a fascinating thing. So when you sing ultimate truth, pot's not there anymore. So what's happened? You know? So does that mean pot doesn't exist at all? Well, we're still drinking out of pots. So it's a bit going a bit far to say, well, if pot doesn't exist on the ultimate level, it can't exist at all. You know. So we have to be able to understand what arising and lasting and ceasing are all about. And so that does involve us in questions like subtle impermanence. So I was asked to talk a bit about that. So maybe we can have a discussion about that. Some of you will have heard it before, but you know, it's worth coming back to, because you've already got to sort of familiarize your mind with it, not just sort of agree in a kind of, you know, intellectual way. Oh yeah, that's true, but it doesn't. It's got to kind of, you know, become part of your way of looking at the world, even though it's sort of a, you know, sort of hidden phenomena. Yeah. So what about a thing like a pot then? You know, some kind of well-made clay object like this. I don't know in ancient India how good quality of pots they managed to make. You know, I've seen potters working, you know, with the wheels in India, like just no electricity. It's the old style wheel that you whirl around by, you know, using the power of your hand. You stick a stick in and you whirl the wheel around, then you make the pot. You know, very traditional ways of making things. I still saw them in Bulgaria when I was wandering around, you know, around the stupa. So these guys are making roof tiles, you know, but the sort of so you make a cylinder, hollow cylinder, and you cut it in half. Then you have two sort of roof tiles of that sort of curved shape, you know. So that wasn't very high grade pottery, just pretty sort of you know, low fired and stuff like that. But the Chinese, of course, they made very, very kind of excellent quality porcelain from very early on. And you can see a vase of Chinese porcelain, maybe 1,000 years old, can't you, in somewhere like the British Museum? And how old does it actually look, Or at least you can take a pot like this, like a modern type of pot like that. Take a photograph of it now, and then take another photograph of it a year later. If you just leave it without sort of cracking it and breaking it, obviously, but just leave it on the shelf, and then another year later you take a photograph. It'd be very difficult. It would be very difficult to say which is the photograph of today and which is the photograph of last year. Just by looking at the pot, wouldn't it? Because it maintains a similar appearance, so it doesn't look impermanent at all. I mean, we know if we drop it on the floor, if we hit it with a hammer, it'll smash. So we know that the gross impermanence is there. Eventually it will get smashed, surely. But in the meantime, it's maintaining this similarity of appearance. So what does that mean? Is it actually not changing? Or is it actually changing all the time? So what do you think, Joris?
It's changing all the time.
Sound very confident. Where have you learned that? Yeah, so we're talking about a change which is below the sensory level, right? We can't see that, or maybe Joris can. Super Joris. Or he's got to have a very good reason, because and there will be other schools, other maybe non-Buddhist schools. Impermanence is a kind of a specialization of the Buddhists. But a lot of the schools say, yeah, well, it is impermanent in the sense it'll get smashed someday. But while it's around and nothing much is happening to it, then it is, what's wrong with it being just permanent? So what's the hang-up about having to say it is impermanent all the time? Why can't it be permanent until the external cause comes along and starts damaging it or something? So what do you say, Joris? It's permanent until these external causes impact on it, and otherwise it's permanent, yeah? So he's disagreeing with that. Joris is shaking his head. So then, is your theory that the pot is impermanent then in this subtle level, constant change, right? Constant momentary change.
Yes, there's not a moment that it's one thing, it's always changing.
Yeah. So where do you derive this, your view from? From blind belief or?
Science. High school.
High school science. You never know. He's probably had very good high schools in Holland, yeah? Joris is from Holland. Not the kind of school I went to. No, we had that view in science. I remember being told that. Anyway, what's your evidence for saying this pot is impermanent, Joris?
My evidence is scientific measurements that show that the protons, neutrons, electrons are constantly moving and changing, and the molecules in there are constantly moving around and changing as well. And they disintegrate.
Can you hear him talking?
No.
You can hear him?
Yes,
Some say yes, some say no. It's like it's supposed to be a microphone for getting, picking up sounds from all directions, but obviously he's sitting quite a way away. We've got to keep this social distance for, coronavirus purposes. So we can't all sit too close together, apparently. They've all taken their masks off. So he's saying something like, yeah, science, blah, blah, blah. Atoms. Well, that's all he's saying. The scientists say there's protons, there's neutrons, and they make up the atoms and all, even if you go below the atomic level, and it's all, active. It's all like in constant motion. And I remember that from science, that even a crystal, there's something very solid like or very rigidly structured like a crystal salt or something like that. I remember our physics or our chemistry teacher saying, "Oh, but the atoms are still vibrating even within the lattice of the crystals." Is that what you're basing?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's blind belief, yeah.
In a way, it is, but it's based on solid reasoning, I would say. The arguments make sense.
Have you ever
so I haven't
looked
proved
through?
I haven't proved it myself.
No, you've never
I
looked
have
through an
looked-
electron microscope and
No.
seen vibrating.
No, through a normal microscope, yes, but not through an electron microscope.
But would you see any vibration through a normal microscope?
Depending on the object, but most solid objects, I don't think so.
I remember they had this one called Brownian motion. Do you remember that one? Maybe that's an English word for it. Brownian motion. Brown was the name of the guy who.
I know about Brown, but I haven't heard about Brownian motion.
Well, it's something like you had a large molecular object which is big enough to be seen by the microscope.
Mm-hmm.
But when you looked at it, these bigger molecules were moving around. And why were they moving? They weren't hitting each other, but there were smaller ones which weren't big enough to be seen by the microscope, smaller atoms or something, which, because they were vibrating, because they were being heated or something, the movement of those made the bigger ones vibrate, the ones that you could see. So from the vibrating of the bigger ones, you could deduce that there was some smaller ones that were hitting them from different angles and making them move a bit. So I remember seeing that through the microscope. Joris hasn't. He's just believing it because he's just, he believes in scientific propaganda.
You could also say,
He believes scientific propaganda, which is all be materialist. We don't even believe in enlightenment anymore because we all just, our minds die when our bodies die. Is that what you believe, Joris?
No,
When your body dies, your mind dies.
I don't believe that. But I do think that science can help us reaffirm some of the things we discovered in Buddhism.
Exactly, yeah. But what we want is a reasoned, correct understanding, which is convincing because it's based on solid reasoning. Yeah. If we say yes, I believe it because the Buddha taught it, there might be some mileage in that, or I believe that because my guru says so. I'm not criticizing that as being, in a kind of, not part of the path. No. There are things which are kind of quite hidden, and even, factual reasoning can't bring them out because they're too subtle even for, plain reasoning. We have to sort of rely on testimony and so forth. Yeah. But if we just believe in the scientists, then we must do all we can to get to the point where we have a reasoned understanding, which is convincing because it's based on an infallible, inferential, direct or valid cognizer, inferential cognizer.
Well, maybe then I could say I did a Vipassana course and then I had this experience of my whole body vibrating. So it looks solid, but it was vibrating.
I've heard that one before as well. He went to a Vipassana course and he felt his whole body vibrating. So he thought, oh, that's impermanent. Yeah, I've heard that one before. Vipassana.
can we,
Yeah, we want Dharmakirti's reasoning, man, come on.
the atoms as well, though, you could say, even though they're moving around, to us they appear as they're permanent. The little things moving still are unchanging. They're just moving location. That's how some people can look at atoms even then, even if they do see them. They appear, they're moving around, but they themselves are permanent.
Yeah, but it would make the pot impermanent. The pot impermanent, because it's full of these vibrating molecules. So the substance of the pot is, is going through these transformations. But the atoms themselves, the particles, they could be permanent. And I think there's some people who say that in the Buddhist world, or in the sort of non-Buddhist Indian ancient philosophies. Yeah, so we can say all these things are kind of transforming because the particles are, doing their dance, but particles themselves, they're permanent. So I think there'll be some people who were, might posit that one. I don't think there'll be Buddhists really, because I think even the Vaibhasikas, the great expositions, they accept partless particles. To defend their view, they accept that the particles are small enough so they don't have any more parts. But whether that means they are therefore permanent, I don't know. I don't think that they would dare say that. because the whole point of Buddhist thrust is impermanent.
If they accept that they are impermanent, the ultimate truth, that impermanent.
Yeah, so Jimper is telling me that yes, they accept partless particles, so they're ultimate truths in their school, but still they're impermanent. So what's the reasoning then? Yeah. What's your reasons, Oksana?
Maybe with a coarse object like pot, it is very difficult to realize subtle impermanence with the naked eye. So maybe then we should look for a more subtle object, like I don't know, maybe like our thoughts. Then it's easier to realize how fast they change, rather than pot now and 1 year later will still look the same.
Yeah, but we accept the pot as impermanent, but how do we prove that to somebody who's skeptical? Yes, we can say, look at your thoughts. Yes, this is Dzogchen is making this contribution. Yes, so we look at the phenomena that are more manifestly impermanent, like our thoughts. That's a good one. Use our own minds, that they're very volatile and moving all around all the time. They never stop. But I said, well, maybe when we're asleep and not dreaming, I don't know. But most of the time, our minds are all over the place. So it's very clear, constantly renewing attention in every moment, even when we're concentrating on one object. Yeah, so we can, so if we look at our own bodies, we can really get a sense of our bodies as tremendous, currents of energy going through all the time. So we're not like lumps of cold pizza. Us, yeah, we are not like sort of wax statues that don't do anything, can't get anywhere. We're full of transformation, very dynamic. So a lot of that we can see if we just want to start concentrating on it. But we want to know how pot. So why is pot the same as those, just but at a subtler level? Why can't pot be something which, as soon as people start messing with it and they've made it and they put it on the shelf, why isn't it something which just stays there and stops changing until somebody starts using it and pouring hot water in it and kind of shaking it about? So we have, we've had the discussions like this before with many people here. So I think we've got, we all know the example I'm going to bring up and the syllogism I'm going to put forward. So the Buddhist reasoning, classic Buddhist reasoning that we learn about when we, study these things, when we get on to Dharmakirti's, presentation of logic. He's one of the founding fathers of the Buddhist logical system. He says the subject sound. He takes sound as the kind of an easier subject to realize subtle impermanence on, not pot. But he could take pot as his subject, but he takes sound. I think he's arguing against his Hindu philosophers. Some of whom say sound is permanent, or at least the sound of the Vedas. There are some sounds that are permanent. Anyway, sound, it follows, it is impermanent because it's a product. Just like the last moment of the flame of a butter lamp. Okay. So that's our founding, our kind of, our basic syllogism. So just kind of get some sort of memory of that or something. Sound, the subject sound, it is impermanent because it's a product. For instance, just like the last moment of the flame of the butter lamp. Yeah, so I'm going to have to talk about that now. I mean, it'd be nice to meditate on it straight away, but some of us may be a bit not so familiar with the argument. But I think most of us here have heard that, haven't they? So maybe we could do some meditation, really. The last sort of 15 minutes of the class till 12 o'clock, which is 11 o'clock in England. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe we should try and go more down the meditation route here. Then when you're sort of just concentrating on it internally, maybe it becomes a bit more, a bit more sort of kind of a bit more sort of apparent to you what we're talking about. But anyway, remember, I think the important thing to remember is cause then effect. Yeah, cause then effect. So don't say that the cause and the effect can be simultaneous. The cause of it and it have to be sequential, right? So that's important to remember that. But then those of us who have been doing the science reasoning class, we say the importance of the similar example. So in order to prove something, where do we establish the pervasion first? We establish it on the similar example. So this is a very good example of this syllogism, yeah? The last moment of the butter lamp. In the textbook, it gives, sound is impermanent because it's a product, just like pot, for instance. But that's assuming that somebody's already realized impermanence on pot, and they just need to transfer that realization to, the subject of the syllogism, which is sound. But here we're not like that. We're trying to realize impermanence for the first time, you see. So we need pot would not be a suitable example for that. In fact, I think the impermanence of pot is harder to realize than the impermanence of sound. So it's not a very good simple example at all, really, but it can stimulate debate when it's put there in the text. But the last mode of the flame of the butter lamp is a bit different, you see, because there we can think about impermanence in a way that's a bit more visible. Yeah, we're going from the manifest to the hidden, you see. The manifest impermanence of the flame going out and going from there to impermanence of sound. So that's what we need. We go from something that's easy to see to something more difficult to see. Zoltan was always going along these lines. But we have to get this sort of momentary nature thing sort of, coming clearly to us and saying, well, yes, pot must also be like that, even though it looks kind of pretty rigid and unchanging. In fact, being produced from causes and conditions, it has to be just the same as these other phenomena, which are a bit easier to realize in terms of their impermanence. Yeah, so that's the key reason, produced from causes and conditions. That's the reason, yeah. So the reason has to be a bit more easy to understand than the predicate impermanence, right? So it's produced from causes and conditions. So that's not so hard to understand in terms of sound or in terms of pot or in terms of the last moment of the butter lamp. Yeah, so that's produced from causes and conditions. So we can give us a reason, but we can see that happening. We can see a pot being made. We can see, the flame going out, we know why it's going out. Yeah. Okay, so let's just try and meditate on this now. So first of all, just think of the last moment of the butter lamp. So just visualize that. Last moment of the candle. So we're not talking about the wind coming along blowing it out. Here we are thinking about it's running out of fuel. Okay, so just see that butter lamp in your mind's eye. Just the fuel is really, really low. So think what happens then, At a certain point we go from light to dark. The butter lamp goes out. The butter lamp, usually the wick is fixed in the bottom of the cup, so it's not like the wick of a candle can fall over. There's still some wax left, but the wick loses its support, it just falls over and goes out as it's like, it falls into the wet wax. Here, the butter lamp, usually the wick is fixed to the bottom of the cup so that the fuel does burn right down to the end. And it only goes out when there's no more fuel. So that's what's happened. So why has it gone out? There's no more fuel. But it's actually quite interesting, you see. So the fuel is the cause of the flame. So the fuel, gives up its entity into the flame, and the fuel becomes the flame, let's say. So that's clearly, a case of the cause being destroyed, the cause ceasing, in order for the effect to arise. Just like, if seed becomes a sprout, the sprout grows from the seed, that's the end of the seed. Seed gives up its nature, gives up its entity, being a seed, and something new, recognizably different, comes from it, sprout. So this is what's happening here, the fuel plus the oxygen and so forth, of course. Fuel enters the hot zone, and it ignites, and that's how you get your release of energy from the fuel. The fuel disintegrates, or is destroyed as the effect arises. So you can think a little bit about that. It's just a hydrocarbon, oxidation. So the oxygen from the atmosphere is rapidly, kind of combines with the hydrogen and the carbon of the fuel, and the hydrogen and the carbon in the fuel are bonded together in a molecule of hydrocarbon, and then the bonds between the hydrogen and the carbon split apart somehow, and the hydrogen bonds with the oxygen, and the carbon bonds with the oxygen too. So we have sort of H2O and carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. But there's also at that point a release of heat, you see. There's a release of energy, which is what we're seeking, whether we want heat or light. So, that's the story of man's discovery of fire, isn't it? Whether it's firewood in those early days, or whether it's fossil fuel gas or oil, or if it's animal products like butter. It's all the same thing, same chemical reaction. And who put the carbon and the hydrogen together in the first place? Well, that's the plants, isn't it? The plants, through the power of the sun, put the carbon and the hydrogen together, made a carbohydrate, or a hydrocarbon, whatever you want to call it. And then that was eaten by certain animals. So you have animal products, or then either those animals die and go into the ground, or the plants themselves die and get buried, so they become coal or oil or gas or whatever. So it's all the same photosynthesis of the plant world with the power of the sun that is storing all that energy up in these combustible materials, which man has then taken advantage of. And now the whole world is burning down. Forest fires everywhere, global heating and all that. Anyway, that's impermanent. So a little butter lamp, a little flame. So you can see how, in order for the effect to rise, the cause has to be destroyed. But what the point is, then you ask, why did the flame go out? Well, because there's no more fuel. So as soon as the cause is used up, then the effect has to cease, right? So that's a very interesting thing. In order for the effect to arise, the cause has to be destroyed. The cause gets destroyed. But as soon as the cause is destroyed, or in the next moment after the cause is destroyed, then the effect has to cease too. So I'm not saying the rising of the flame and the going out of the flame. I'm not saying they're simultaneous. No, there is a tiny moment. So that's your infinitesimal moment. That's your impermanence. The cause gives up itself, gives up its entity, becomes destroyed, and in doing so, it gives rise to the effect of flame. But as soon as there's no more cause, then there's no more effect. So the flame goes out. If you want more flame, if you want more effect, a longer flame, then you have to have more fuel. But it's always the same story. As soon as that particular cause is consumed, that little drop of fuel is consumed, then the flame that little drop of fuel produced, in the next, tiny moment, in the infinitesimal moment, it's vanished, it's gone. The combustion has taken place, it's over. And you're just left with a bit of smoke and a bit of, bit of warmth in the air, vibrating the air molecule, or some sort of light, whatever that is. But it vanishes. So that's the the power of this last moment of the butter lamp example, I think. So the fuel, the flame arises immediately from the fuel. There's no gap between the flame and the fuel. Yeah? Flame ends, fuel begins. Sorry, fuel ends, flame begins. The direct cause and its effect. But as soon as the flames are used up, as soon as the fuel is used up, then the flame goes out. So that's just an infinitesimal moment later. So it doesn't need a wind to come along and blow that flame out. Doesn't need somebody to throw a bucket of water on it, It goes out by itself, It's just like that's the nature of an effect. As soon as its causes are kind of finished, and in the next moment it also gets finished. That's just in the nature of conditioned phenomena. It's not like there has to be some external, sort of hammer hitting the pot, or some external, somebody throwing water on the flame. As soon as its causes are used up, it goes out. So you think back along all the previous moments of the flame and that butter lamp, and they're all the same. If you want another moment of flame, you have to have another moment of fuel. So it's not like one moment of flame is the substantial cause of the next moment of flame, and that gives rise to the next moment of flame gives up its entity and becomes the third moment of flame, and that in turn becomes the fourth moment of flame. It's not like that. The substantial cause of each moment of flame is a previous moment of, it's another moment of fuel rising up the wick, entering the hot zone. So as you look back along the history of the flame of that butter lamp, every moment of the flame arose from a different drop of fuel. So every moment of flame arose from a different cause to the other ones, before or after. So that's momentary impermanence. Every moment is rising from a different set of causes, another drop of fuel, another sort of oxidation event. So that's a little look at sort of subtle impermanence when you think back along the series of moments of that flame. So what about, we take our bodies at this point. What did we eat this morning? We probably ate a bit of breakfast. And what are we doing with our lungs all the time? Breathing in oxygen. And what we're doing, we're eating carbohydrates, basically. Obviously, that's not enough for a good diet, but a large part of our diet is this carbohydrate. What are we doing with it? Well, we digest it. The liver turns it into glucose or something, sugar. And then that gets sent to all the cells in our body. And then we're breathing in, and the blood supply brings oxygen to all our bodies. The oxygen meets the glucose in a situation of, it enters the hot zone kind of thing. So there's combustion going on in all our cells, just like that, and every moment of the heat produced in our bodies, for all these chemical reactions, all the things we need to do to, keep the body running. Just needs the energy input there, cooking away in every cell. But each moment of heat in our every cell is just like the last moment of the butter lamp. It's arising from a new, set of causing conditions, new supply of fuel, new oxygen. So then, it's very easy to see that bodies too are just brilliant examples of settling terms of work. Sound of your voice. Sound now. Sound is the subject of the sentence, right? The subject of the syllogism. Sound is impermanent. But you think about the sound of your voice. How do you get to keep on speaking? It's just more breath has to come through the throat, doesn't it? More breath has to come through the vocal cords. Something has to make those vocal cords vibrate. So every time you make a moment of sound, you need more breath. So every moment of the sound of your voice is just coming from a new set of causes, new set of breath, new vibrations of those flaps or whatever they are of skin and so forth. So sound too is just thoroughly impermanent in every moment. So how is pot any different? It looks the same, but it's still the same underneath the gross appearance. As soon as a cause arises, as soon as an effect arises, it has to disintegrate. Why? Because its causes disintegrate. So the pot too is just the same transformative process, arising, lasting, passing away. Nothing at all to grasp at. So we'll have to stop there now for a tea break. So just keep the good energy going. Want to realize self-impermanence for the benefit of progressing on the path. It's all part and parcel of removing suffering, helping other beings. So keep the good motivation going, dedication. So we'll take a half an hour break. See you in a bit.